you have this incredible intolerance now of dissenting views in the lands where free speech was born. When you lose free speech, you lose civilized society. When you lose free speech, that's when people start picking up weapons to settle their differences. So it's incredibly significant that, and incredibly important that we protect our free speech rights here.
This week's specials with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. 2022 Gold Britannias for only $79 over spot. 2022 Silver Britannias for only $375 over spot. And 2021 Silver Philharmonics for only $375 over spot. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest who our viewers are very enthusiastic about because he is so informed about what's going on and what we can do about it in our world. This is Alex Newman. He's a journalist. He's an author. He's a founder of societies as well as publications, and he writes out frequently about liberty and freedom. Alex, thank you for joining us this Tuesday, October 19, 2021.
Hey, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for having me, Dunnigan.
I admire your grasp of current events and historical foundations of freedom and the assaults that have been happening on it and tyranny and so on for millennia. But we would like to help you give us a chance to bring us up to speed in the current era of assaults on our liberties. And we also want to circle back at the end and let people know how they can get a hold of you or get signed up for the Red Pill Expo that's coming up in about a week here, 2 weeks, if they want to. And but right now, if we could circle back with a theme that we had addressed with you in the past, and that's our freedoms under assault. Just rattling off, just in very briefly, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to bear arms, freedom of movement and travel, financial privacy and looking after our own affairs, medical freedoms and privacy of our own body, pursuit of happiness, being able to keep your job, your career, your business that you built, freedom to raise and educate our children. In every one of those areas, there are significant current, active, clear and imminent dangers, threats, and actual actions that people are being subject to. Just first comes to mind is like freedom of speech, the deplatforming risk that several people who have spoken out have talked about and have happened to them, but also even like professionals such as doctors or others, whistleblowers who in the past, the saying was, if you see something, say something, but now it's like, if you say something, you're going to get whacked. Can you talk to us first about a loss of freedom of speech in this current environment?
Yeah, actually, I just gave a speech on the loss of freedom of speech just a few days ago, so the topic has been on my mind. It is incredible how quickly the assaults on freedom of speech are coming. And, I think Americans need to realize the reason why we've been able to maintain our freedom of speech thus far is because of the First Amendment. If it had not been for the First Amendment, we would not have even what we have left. But, I identify three primary threats to our freedom of speech, and we see kind of how they're all working together right now. First, we've got the international threat, right? We've got the United Nations, which outrageously claims that you have a human right not to be offended, and that your human rights don't include the right to say things that the UN considers to be hate speech. And, I think I should clarify here, because people think of hate speech and they think of like someone advocating for genocide against Jews or something, that's what they want people to think. But really, the concept of hate speech actually comes from the Soviet Union. This was a term that was entered into the UN's globalist lexicon by the Soviet dictatorship, the most hateful, mass murdering regime that I can think of, with the possible exception of the Communist Chinese and maybe a handful of others. So these are the people who came up with this idea of hate speech. These are the people who got it enshrined into UN agreements. And so now you have a very bizarre situation where UN human rights czars are running around the world saying that under the guise of human rights, you have to limit what people can say, okay? And they actually identify whole categories of things that you're not allowed to say under their vision of human rights. You can't criticize mass immigration. You can't criticize Islam. Even, from a theological perspective, you can't say, Islam is erroneous for the following reasons. They don't want people to say things bad about political leaders and things like this. So it's a very bizarre development. Then we have, of course, the big tech companies, which are working with the United Nations, and they're also working with other globalist organizations like the European Union. In fact, Europol, their so-called police agency, they've actually set up an entire unit dedicated to fighting so-called extremism on the internet. And it's very interesting because the United Nations and some of these other global entities have all specifically said that they're even targeting what they call non-violent extremism, right? When they talk about it in the American context, political leaders always throw the word violent in. Well, we can't have violent extremist ideologies floating around on the internet. But when you get to the UN, even the British leadership, the leaders of their government have said we got to go after non-violent extremism. And when you drill down into, the term is so loaded, but what they mean by extremism is really just you disagree with us extremely seriously. And so we can't have that kind of extremism. And frankly, to have the UN talking about extremism, to me, is like a cruel joke. I mean, the UN is a collection of mass murderers, kleptocrats, gangsters, cutthroats, thieves, kleptocrats. I mean, who are they to talk about extremism, right? If it's not extreme to murder huge numbers of your citizens, if it's not extreme to operate concentration camps with over 1 million Muslims in Western China, if it's not extreme to chop out organs from political and religious dissidents, I don't know what the word extreme even means. And yet you have the UN working with these big tech companies supposedly going after extremism. And it all comes together, Dunnigan, in the International Telecommunications Union. It's a agency of the United Nations, very significant. They've got about 15 specialized agencies, and the ITU is one of those. And this agency is literally run by a member of the Communist Party of China. His name is Howlin Chow, and he is an extremist in the truest sense of the term. Right when he was selected for the job, a South Korean reporter said, well, hey, you guys are from China. You guys censor the internet and stuff, right? I mean, how can you run this ITU? He said, oh, no. Censorship is it's in the eye of the beholder. What you think is censorship is not censorship for me. So you've got big tech companies like Fascist Book, also known as Facebook, like YouTube, Google, Twitter, all these guys openly jumping into bed with the United Nations, with the European Union to silence our speech. And that brings me to the last and what I consider the final major threat to our free speech here in America, and that is the extremists and the totalitarians right here in this country, many of whom are in Silicon Valley, many of whom are in Washington, D.C., many of whom are in New York, and many of whom are sitting in corporate boardrooms. And they're all working together. Okay, you have different categories of these people in the United States, right? You've got the executives, the people, the Mark Zuckerbergs who want to silence your speech. You've got what's the guy who runs Twitter's name? I forget his name now. Jack Dorsey. You've got these kinds of, billionaire totalitarians, people like Jeff Bezos who want to shut down your book if you question a transgender ideology, if you argue that homosexuality, that there's something wrong about that. They want to shut down your book and delete it from the world. And then you've got the ragamuffins out in the streets, the Antifa, that want to beat your face in with a baseball bat if you express some opinion counter to their extremist ideology. So all of these forces have now come together, and Americans need to be very careful. Okay, free speech was really born in Reformation Europe. Okay, and I think it's critical that people understand that. So about 500 years ago, free speech was truly born. And now there were efforts to suppress it; they were just unsuccessful. And so that's where free speech came out of. The UK, I'm thinking of, Britain, the Netherlands, Scandinavia. I mean, these are places where free speech truly flourished with the Reformation, and then all of these places are now throwing people in jail for speaking out. Literally, they're throwing pastors in jail in Sweden, in the UK. It doesn't matter if you're Catholic or Orthodox or Protestant. They're going to people and saying, well, what is your opinion on homosexuality? And they know you're going to open up your Bible and you're going to quote and say, aha, you're busted. Right. So you have this incredible intolerance now of dissenting views in the lands where free speech was born, and that is migrating over to the United States. So I started off by talking about the First Amendment. That is the one final barrier that we have. But they've found, they think, the way to get around it, and that is by moving us all onto the internet and then allowing private companies to decide what we can and can't say and how we can say it. And I want to just say this last thing, Dunnigan. I know I've been rambling on and on about this question, but it's so critical, because when you lose free speech, you lose civilized society. When you lose free speech, that's when people start picking up weapons to settle their differences. So it's incredibly significant that and incredibly important that we protect our free speech rights here. So what's happened now with these big tech companies is that they're pretending to be private actors. They're not, okay? Almost every single one of these was stood up with government money. Google was started with help from DARPA. Fascist Book, also known as Facebook, was started with help from key people out of Incutel, which is the investment arm of the intelligence community, right? The line separating these big tech companies from the government is so porous, it's practically non-existent. I mean, you can hardly tell where one ends and the other begins. And yet we know for a fact that these big tech companies are acting as arms of the government. Dr. Shiva, who I've spoken with many times before. We've had him actually at several of our Red Pill Expos. I've interviewed him many times. And he was actually running as a candidate for U.S. Senate, and he alleged that there was voter fraud. And so he started posting about this on Twitter. Twitter silenced him. They took down his post, and then they banned his account. So he sued. And as part of that lawsuit, he got proof that Twitter was acting on orders from government bureaucrats in the state of Massachusetts to shut down his account and censor him. So these big tech companies are acting as arms of the government, while at the same time saying, well, we're private companies. We can censor your speech if we don't like it. You signed up to our terms of service. So our free speech, Dunnigan, is in mortal danger, and I hope people appreciate the significance of this. If you lose your free speech, your most fundamental of all your rights, it's not going to take long until all the rest are disappeared as well.
Two more aspects of that I'd like to focus on. One is that free speech is related to thought. It's difficult for most people to form well-formed, tested, and strong ideas that are able to withstand assault unless they're able to talk it through and hear the thoughts that have been formed by others in the form of speech to really help crystallize and to build critical mass around those thoughts. And I think that's one of the reasons it's considered threatening by those in power who would like to not have power be gained by ordinary people. One of the ways that can happen is for people gathering together to share ideas. And you mentioned online is a major way to do that. But what about the right of association, the right of assembly, the right of people just to get together and talk about things that matter to them? And we've seen all kinds of restrictions on that as far as no gatherings of 10 or more, 50 or more, pick a number, now 10,000 or more in some ways or whatever. But these stadiums full of people that are getting lit up, or these streets full of people in France or in Australia or other places where they are trying to get together. People are trying to come together so that they can talk. But when there's been mask mandates or restrictions on people's ability to gather, how does the encroachment on our right, freedom of association and of assembly affected our freedom?
Yeah, I think these are intimately related, right? So on the one hand, they told us you can't go to church because of COVID. You cannot gather in groups, things like this. On the other, but don't worry, you could do church on the internet, right? You could just watch your pastor streaming online. And then they say, your pastor just questioned the COVID narrative. Can't say that. You got to shut down this account. So what they've done is they've set up a system where they're able to control and regulate all discussion, all flow of ideas. And, we know that these big tech companies have manipulated their algorithms to bury content they don't like if they don't outright ban it. And so we have all of these attacks coming together. And I think people need to realize the significance of the fact that these are all part and parcel of the same problem. You're exactly right. If people can communicate with each other, and I think that's a key part of this, Dunnigan, they realize that if people can talk to each other, they'll realize that this narrative is fraudulent. They'll realize that these attacks on our liberties are dangerous. But if they can keep everybody at home, isolated on their own, on Facebook and watching CNN, then they think they can control the narrative. And even the people who realize that they're being deceived are going to think, and we've seen this right now, I guess it's only my wife and I that realize that there's something wrong with this. I don't want to be seen as kooky. I'm not going to mention this at work. I'm not going to mention this at church. So it has an incredibly chilling effect on our ability to communicate with each other. So there's a reason why the founders put all of these things in the very First Amendment, right? Your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, your freedom of assembly, right? There's a reason that all of these go together. They are fundamental. They are critical. They're all part and parcel of the same general thing. And it really is the first defense for all the rest of our liberties, right? The first remedy to an attack on your God-given rights is to say, hey, that's not okay. Well, what happens when you can't say, hey, that's not okay, and you can't communicate with other people so that you can get together and do something about it? Well, you enter a very, very dangerous situation. So we now have our most fundamental rights, our most fundamental freedoms in mortal danger. And people didn't think it would happen, and yet it did. They threw pastors in jail right here in Florida. Everybody thinks that Florida did so well, and it did overall throughout this pandemic. But even here, we had a pastor arrested on the Gulf Coast, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown. They literally showed up with SWAT and helicopters. They had a press conference. They trotted out some pastor to argue that it was good to arrest this pastor because he was disobeying the COVID mandates. So this is the kind of lunacy we can expect much more of if we're not careful, if we don't stand up and say, yeah, this is intolerable. You have no authority to do that. We're not going to obey that. People have got to realize that the time to resist these things is now while we still can, rather than wait until it's too late to be able to do anything about it.
You mentioned that awakening that people have when they realize they're not alone, that they're not the only ones, because it's so disempowering. That the old saying, divide and conquer, is very effective. When people feel isolated, they feel powerless. And it's been remarkable to us how many people, and this comes up just all kinds of different situations, the most innocuous situations. We were at a theme park with a get-together with our team, and we approached a couple who were sitting at a table because the tables were hard to come by, and we asked, would it be all right if we sat with you, or are you distancing or whatever? They said, oh no, please, come on, sit here. So we sat with them, and having just said, are you okay if we sit near you? They just started just unloading about, oh my gosh, can you believe all this restrictions? Can you believe this? Can you believe this? We've known people, one is a senior medical worker at a hospital. The other one is a paramedic. They talked about all these medical, not unable to speak about things, unable to tell what's really going on. The guy had seen someone expire and be unable to be revived right after taking a certain medical treatment that's very controversial right now. And they felt, what we've experienced over and over again is people it's like taking the cork out of the bottle, and they're saying, you too, and they're able to communicate where they feel like they haven't been. And the flip side of that, we've talked with Jerry Robinson about propaganda and how it anesthetizes the subject prior to the surgery. So as a means of maintaining control through fear over an entire populace, these words, these messages, this speech that is not free speech but programmed speech from elite power centers is able to create the desired effect on inhibiting people's thought, inhibiting their ability to take action. So what about that flip side of freedom of speech, which is the propaganda we've been subjected to?
Yeah, and at this point, it has gotten so obvious, right? I think the "Let's Go Brandon" is probably the ultimate example of this, right? Everybody is watching, everybody is listening to these people chanting some very unflattering messages about Joe Biden, the supposed president of the United States. And yet, even though we can all hear it with our own ears, even though we can all see this with our own eyes, the news presenter is going to say, oh, look, they're chanting "Let's Go Brandon," right? Now, this is the height of ridiculousness, and yet this is where we're at right now. And I think they've now shifted. Okay, they know that they've lost control of the narrative. They know that the majority of mainstream Americans do not believe their propaganda anymore. Now the goal is simply demoralization and psychological terrorism. They know that as people are watching this garbage, they're not thinking, oh, yeah, that's true. I agree. They know people are thinking, oh, man, why are they saying these lies? Am I the only one who knows this? And I think that's the point. Yuri Bezmenov, the very, very well-known defector from the KGB who came over here and actually did that extraordinary interview with Ed Griffin, explained that this was how it was in the Soviet Union. Everybody knew that the Soviet press was lying, that it was propaganda. And part of that it was just an effort to demoralize you, right? The people knew it was propaganda. The propagandists knew that the people knew it was propaganda. But if they just keep spewing it at you, it has this incredible demoralizing effect. And that's what we're seeing now, where you can't trust your own eyes, where CNN is literally going to tell you that, oh, those 4 words, do your own research. That's jeopardizing the success of the government's pandemic response. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. So the propaganda is a critical part of this. This could not be sustained without the propaganda. I'm very encouraged that it seems like we've passed a corner. We've turned a corner here on the propaganda in that normal Americans aren't buying it anymore. And honestly, Dunning, I think that was clear in 2016. Think whatever you want about Donald Trump. The media endlessly demonized him. In fact, the study showed that more than 92% of the coverage from the big 3 networks was negative. Out of the top 100 newspapers in America, only 2 went for Donald Trump. It was a nonstop, constant barrage of attacks, of lies, of demonization of this man. And yet the American people still went out despite all that and voted. Maybe even it wasn't despite it was because of they went out and they voted for this man to be their president. That tells you where the American people are, that the entire combined force of the propaganda machine cannot even convince people not to vote for a guy for president. You look on YouTube, for example, right? I actually did some analysis with Alex Jones's numbers when YouTube kicked Alex Jones off. It was stunning, right? Alex Jones was getting more people watching his YouTube coverage of the 2016 election than all the big media combined. He was doing more than CNN and Fox and ABC and CBS and NBC. All of them combined, he got 62 million something viewers, and all of them combined didn't even get close to that. So even with the rigged algorithms, even with the tilting of the marketplace of ideas to favor their establishment propaganda, people, when they had the choice, were still pursuing alternatives, even though they had to go way out of their way to find it. So I'm encouraged that they've lost control of the narrative, Dunnigan, but people should not underestimate the importance of the propaganda. Again, it's not even at this point designed necessarily to convince you of what they're saying. It's designed to demoralize you, to terrorize you. I mean, it is literally psychological warfare. And that's why I tell people, turn off the television. You are not getting any benefit from watching this propaganda. None whatsoever. I mean, even just watching it as an objective study. Well, I wonder what the propagandists are trying to feed the sheep today. Even that is, I think, harmful to your mental health. It's harmful to your well-being. I tell people, turn off the TV. Don't let them into your mind. Don't give them the time of day. And that's one of the ways in which you neutralize the power of their propaganda.
How about the freedom of movement and ability to travel? We have a lot of people who've been wanting to vote with their feet and actually relocate to states that are more freedom-loving. I've noticed the Red Pill Expo in South Dakota and so on, and noticed that it tends to be held in states that are upholding more freedoms than others. And but even the ability to go for us house shopping in states like we couldn't go into Michigan. And we were for about 6 months there. There was no such thing as showings because it was considered a non-essential activity for people to find a house to live in.
Let's live under a bridge, Dunnigan.
Yeah. So now we're being faced with other restrictions on people being able to take certain forms of travel unless they submit to certain modifications of their body and so on. What's your view of the importance of the freedom of travel to move from place to place, vote with your feet, et cetera, and where do you see that being encroached, and what do you think people can do about that?
Yeah, I think we're only seeing the very beginnings of this, Dunning. And ultimately, they want a locked down planet where you don't move without permission. I think that's part of the push for these so-called health passports, where you're going to have a QR code on your smartphone to be able to go anywhere, right? If you want to see what that looks like, look at what's going on in Lithuania right now. You can't even go to the grocery store without having your QR code scanned to prove that you're healthy enough, that you're not a biohazard and going to infect everybody. So, it's been much more difficult for them to do that within America because we have these long traditions of liberty. But I mean, we're talking about rights now that I think people didn't even think of as rights before, right? It's like your right to have a job and to open your business. Nobody even thought about that as a freedom. It's just something that you have to do. And then when they came for that right with the COVID hysteria, people are like, whoa. Wait, you mean my job's not essential? You mean I can't go to work? You mean I can't open up my shop and make a living? what's going on here? And it's the same thing with travel, right? Travel wasn't something that we thought of as a freedom until now we've lost it. And we say, oh my goodness, I literally haven't been outside of the country since COVID hit. I've had to cancel probably 6 or 7 international trips. I've been overseas almost my entire life. For me, it's a strange thing to have someone say you can't cross a border without having this kind of documentation or this kind of medical treatment or this kind of injection. What? This is all new to me, but people need to realize this is only the start. These totalitarians have a dream where nobody will be able to move anywhere, even in your own city, right? I'm not talking about international borders. I'm not talking about moving from state to state. I'm talking about you won't be able to go to the shopping mall. You won't be able to go to a restaurant and have a meal if you don't participate in this system that they are trying to build. It's incredibly dangerous, and I hope people are ready to fight this. Now, again, I'm very blessed to be in the state of Florida. We have avoided the worst of that. Now, we've had some jurisdictions and localities that have tried to impose these things. Unfortunately, our governor has stepped in and put the kibosh on that. But and you're right about the Red Pill Expo. We've been very strategic in terms of where we've had them. We would not choose a place where masks were mandatory. We would not choose a place where there are restrictions on the ability to gather or where you have to sit and things like this. And we do that deliberately. But I'll tell you, and it goes back to the previous question, Dunnigan. Meeting together, we met on Jekyll Island in Georgia last year, a little over a year ago. This was the height of the pandemic, right? Everybody's still hiding in their basements. They got the thing on their face, and everybody's in terror. And yet we had 1,000 people getting together, and we're all like, wait, so you're not buying into the and you don't wear a face mask, and you're okay? And there's families, and it's just such a joyous time. The liberating effect of that, of connecting with other people, and realizing, wow, you're not the only one who realizes that society has gone mad, that the government is out of control. It's so empowering. And I think that's a big reason why they want these restrictions on travel and these restrictions on gathering. As long as people can get together and communicate freely with each other without Mark Zuckerberg, the fascist, standing in between and deciding what you can say, how you can say it, who's going to see it, their entire agenda is at risk. It's like the little boy who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes, right? As soon as the people are together and that one little innocent kid says, wait a minute, that guy, he's not wearing any clothes. He's totally naked. What are you fools pretending like he's got clothes on for? And then everybody turns to him and says, wait, so you see that too? And you see it too? So I'm not the only one who realized he was naked. Oh my goodness, we can talk about it now. And suddenly we're free. So the lockdowns, the restrictions on travel, the restrictions on gathering, they're all part of the same agenda. It's not even about just your right to travel. It's not even about just your right to gather. It's about whether you are going to be a free human being or whether we're all going to be turned into serfs who have to ask permission for the most basic things, like the ability to feed ourselves and the ability to move around. That's what's at stake here.
Yeah, you remind me, we interviewed Australian economist John Adams about this, and he said under the New South Wales lockdown that he was subject to, you were permitted to go into your backyard, but not your front yard, or else you could be subject to arrest if you didn't have a specific, taking the trash out to the curb and right back in the house, that kind of thing. Now, back when you talked about that moving communication, moving discourse online allowed it to be controlled, let's make the analogy, if we could, to how that's being done financially. The freedom of people to transact however they want with the fruits of their labor, to hold and own, real money, sound money over periods of time, and save for a rainy day, save for their future, save for their children, and then be able to interact with whomever and whatever they want, whenever they choose to. Freedom. It is now under extreme assault. We've got, right now, we have a supposedly proposed ruling from the part of the infrastructure bill, so-called infrastructure bill, to $600 transactions into or out of any financial institution would be eventually reported to the IRS. And there's been a lot of downplaying on that by Janet Yellen and a lot of concern about it, both from banking industry groups as well as individuals. But this whole push towards a cashless society, by moving all of our affairs, all of our economy into the digital world, where it can be then completely locked down and controlled, and you can't opt out in that sense. Can you talk to us about how real, present, and current you think that this is on our lockdown of our financial freedoms? And maybe by contrast, just like we did with clamping down on personal speech versus profligate, this propaganda, on the same side financially, we're being told you're going to have to open all your books of every transaction that you're doing as an individual unless you have something to hide. versus the government having passed FASB 56 about a year and a half ago, saying all government agencies' budgets are now going to go dark. We'll only tell you what we want to tell you because it's all in the name of national security. So at the same time, you, the serfs, have no privacy. We, the government, have all privacy and all power.
Yeah, it's a total reversal of what our founding fathers imagined, right? Our founding fathers imagined that we'd have a government that was almost entirely transparent. People should be able to know anything they wanted about the operations of the government. The government was tiny, maybe 1,000 employees, and everybody was supposed to know about this, and everybody was supposed to be able to see right through the house of glass that was the government. Meanwhile, and they actually articulated this in the Fourth Amendment, you're supposed to have absolute privacy of your person, your house, your papers, your effects, and if anybody wants to ruffle through those, they've got to have a warrant signed by a judge, particularly detailing the places to be searched and the things or the people to be seized, right? That was the standard that was enshrined in our Constitution. And last time I checked, the Constitution is still technically the supreme law of the land here, and yet they've flipped it totally upside down. Now, you get no privacy. We will spy on all your communications. We will listen to all your phone calls. We will collect all your emails and put them in massive NSA warehouse databases out in the desert of Utah. But you don't get to know anything about us. So we're going to have encrypted communications, and we're going to have everything hiding, like you said, under the guise of national security. So it does go right into this issue of money. Okay, there has been an agenda to turn America and the world into a cashless society for a long, long time. And actually, what's interesting is they formalized this in 2012. The Ford Foundation, the United Nations, the Rockefeller Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, Visa, MasterCard, and you can see where some of these have a profit motive to get involved here. And then you have even the U.S. government, right? U.S. aid was helping to fund this. Their secretariat is at the UN. It's called Better Than Cash Alliance. And as part of this, they were pushing all these governments around the world to eliminate cash. They want to get everybody into the banking system. And there's a number of reasons why they want to do this, but I think ultimately it boils down to control. Now, yes, they want to be able to enforce negative interest rates. They want to be able to give you your universal basic income, deliver it right into your account, and then manipulate that or reduce that as time goes on if you don't spend it all. So they want to be able to do all those things. But ultimately, the key point here is your privacy is gone and your freedom is gone. Okay, and we think it's bad that they want to report every $600 transaction to the IRS. Yeah, that's horrific. That's insane. That is going to be weaponized. That's going to be a tool to terrorize dissidents. The IRS code has already become a tool to terrorize dissidents. Don't believe me? Ask Lois Lerner, right? There's nobody on planet Earth who understands the entire tax code. And I mean nobody. It's significantly longer than the Bible, right? There's not one CPA on this planet. There's not one tax attorney on this planet that knows everything about the tax code. It's just not possible. And so what happens is this is a tool whereby they can target anyone. And even if they can't officially convict you of a crime in their kangaroo courts and the rigged system, they can make your life miserable, right? You're guilty until proven innocent. They can drag you through the coals. They can force you to produce every kind of document you ever imagine. And they do this regularly to people who ask hard questions or who stand up against the machine. Now, this is what they do now when we have the ability to use cash. When I can walk into a store or I can buy from my neighbor paying cash and nobody has to know about it. How do you think things would become if everything had to run through computer systems, if the government could monitor and track and control everything, right? They want you to think this is about drug dealers and tax evaders. Nothing could be further from the truth. Look who they turned their sights on just over the last few months here. Parents are now the terrorists, right? You are upset by the nonsense they're indoctrinating your children with. Well, you might be a domestic terrorist, and we're going to stick the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and the counterterrorism programs on you, mom and dad. So, folks, put all this together and you realize what they're building here is a totalitarian system. The restrictions on movement are part of it. The restrictions on speech are part of it. The restrictions on your ability to engage in commerce, to buy or sell. And I mean, we see it now, right? They're telling people all over the world. The UN World Health Organization has put out technical guidance for governments on how to build these passport schemes where you can't do anything. You can't buy or sell unless you submit to XYZ treatments. And there are people out there watching thinking, well, I already took XYZ treatment, so I don't care. Do whatever you want, right? And you're missing the point point, okay? You might have taken XYZ treatments, but what happens when they come back and say, now you have to take D, E, F, and G, and you don't want G? Well, now what are you going to do? Now you're part of the Untermensch as well. Now you can't go shopping. Now you can't go to the mall. Folks, let this sink in. Your freedom is on the line here. If you don't stand up right now, while we still have the ability, the tools, the legal means, we still have the Constitution technically as the supreme law of the land. If you don't do it now when we still can do it, if you think you're going to wait 2 years or 5 years to do it till things get really bad, you're kidding yourself. You got to do it now.
One more hit before we leave the medical topic, since you brushed up against it there, is the illogic. And there's a lot of illogic just smattered through everything that's being officially proposed in every category we've talked about so far. It makes no sense. This is another one. The unprecedented restrictions on doctors to practice medicine, being able to prescribe what they believe is in the best interest of their patients or not prescribe what they believe is not in the best interest of the patient. Ability for pharmacists to fill or to fill those orders if the doctor does write them. The ability of the patient to seek out conversations with doctors about this. Ability for doctors, even experts in their field, even foundational pillars in their field, to speak out about these things and get the word out. We have very near and dear friends who have an aging aunt right now the entire family's got a certain illness that everybody's been concerned about because of official announcements over the past year and a half. But they're all coming through it very nicely with proper treatment. And however, the one aunt was not given that same proper treatment, and the family is having to advocate, plead, beg with the doctors who are not supportive and are dismissive about that. So what do we do in the face of denial of care for individuals in our family, for loved ones, when this hits really close to home and people are losing loved ones because of this? How can people access, and we talk with doctors about this, but just from your standpoint as an advocate for freedom, what principles should people be following to make sure that they're taking best care of as their family's health?
Yeah, well, along with all these trends that we've been discussing, then again, there's another trend that is intimately related to all this, and that is the centralization of everything, right? Obamacare was used as a tool to radically centralize the practice of medicine, right? Independent practitioners, independent doctors who had their own practice, these were buried in paperwork, buried in regulation, to the point where they couldn't even practice medicine anymore. They had to hire a staff of 15 people to just fill out all the dumb forms and get everything on the computer and all the rest of it. So this was deliberate. Okay, they wanted all the doctors to go work for these enormous corporations that they could keep on a tight leash. We've seen it in the health insurance industry. We've seen it in the practice of medicine. And so I tell people one of the key solutions here is to get out of the system to the best of your ability. Find yourself an independent physician. There are still some out there who've resisted this trend. What you'll find is a lot of them won't deal with Medicare or Medicaid. So you don't want to be stuck in a government program. And in fact, we don't even use health insurance. We now have joined a Christian ministry where we pay a very low amount every month. We share the costs of our medical treatment with other brothers and sisters around the world, so we don't have to pay for people to murder their babies. We don't have to pay for people to, mutilate their genitals and become a new gender. We don't have to pay if you get, addicted to some kind of crazy drug, because these are not things that Christians are supposed to be doing. And so we've created a voluntary community, and it works very well. So we get out of the mandates, and this is what people need to start doing. Stop supporting the big centralized operations. Of course, it's not just in medicine. We see it in business, right? We see during this whole last year and a half, they shut down a lot of small businesses. And but don't worry, you can go to Walmart, right? You can go buy your stuff on Amazon. So what we've seen is massive increase in the centralization in business, in medicine, in every field. And as individual consumers, we need to go out of our way to resist that. Go to the the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons. They've got big lists of independent physicians practicing all across the country. Find yourself one of those. Find yourself an independent pharmacy, right? Don't go to Walmart. Don't go to CVS. Don't go to Walgreens. There are mom and pop pharmacies that are struggling to stay around all over this country. You might pay $1 more for a jar of 100 pills, right? But it's worth it to keep these people, your neighbors, in business, to keep these alternatives open. And so I encourage people to do your own research, right? CNN says, those are bad words. You can't say those 4 words. Do your own research. find yourself an independent medical practitioner, an independent doctor, get out of the health insurance racket, and find other ways to do these things. It is still possible in this country, but if more people don't consciously make that effort to move over to those kinds of systems, the centralization will be complete, and at that point we will be out of options. And it's not like a new pharmacy can just pop up when Walgreens decides you can't buy the treatment that you need for whatever disease you may have. So we've got to work on, again, I can't emphasize the urgency enough. We've got to work on all these things now, not tomorrow, now.
Yeah, another thing to throw in there as an idea for people is that rather than necessarily pharmacy prescription medications, there are often nutritional or herbal alternatives that may have fewer risks of side effects, be more effective, actually strengthening your general health as well, and may be available at least for the time being without having to go through that choke point of the system. You mentioned again in passing the pursuit of happiness, being able to be employed to build a business, to be able to feed your family, that kind of thing now is at risk because of some of these centralization, but also some of these new policies of mandates that are being lowered down on employers as well as employees. There have been a few bright lights of employee groups standing up, either pilots or postal labor unions or other workers in certain key skilled categories. Is this something that can be expanded in terms of more people standing up and saying, look, we're all essential. You can't just treat us that way. Is it again, together we are stronger, but individually we feel overwhelmed by the forces against us? How about that pursuit of happiness and people being able to stand up?
Yeah, I think it is essential for everybody to resist this. I can't say it any more plainly than that. And our founding fathers, they were brilliant men. They studied the Bible. In fact, the most cited person in their writings was St. Paul, or the Apostle Paul. And after that, you look at the people that they cited, and these were all great Christian people. The words that Thomas Jefferson famously enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, he actually didn't even come up with that language all by himself. That language had been used in 1772 by Samuel Adams in a text that was circulated through the committees of correspondence. The text was called On the Rights of the Colonists. And he says, on the rights of the colonists as Christians, we have a right to life, to liberty, to property, the right to defend all these things. And he says you can find out about these rights just by reading your Bible, read your New Testament. These are laws that were given by the great lawgiver himself. And so these are not things that government has a right to impede on, right? That's what our founding fathers said. They actually said that the purpose of government was to protect these rights. I mean, that's literally the phrase that Thomas Jefferson used. So where did they get these ideas? Well, God in the Bible in the Ten Commandments said, thou shalt not murder. So they figured, well, hey, if God says don't murder, and we know the purpose of government is to punish evil things, and God defined evil as murder, then that means you have a right to life. And that means the job of the government is to protect your life. And if somebody takes your right to life, then their job is to punish that individual. Same thing with property, right? God said, thou shalt not steal. So they said, well, hey, if God says the job of the government is to punish evil, and God says stealing is evil, that means you have a right to private property. And that means nobody can take that away from you. The government didn't give you a right to private property. The government didn't give you a right to pursue your happiness, to work where you want to work, to start a business if you want to start a business. Those rights came from God. They're pre-existing. And we actually set up a government for the purpose of protecting these rights. And people should read the whole Declaration of Independence, because whenever a government becomes destructive to these ends, you need to read the rest. I won't say the rest because the fascist totalitarians at the big tech companies might not like it, but go read the Declaration of Independence. I mean, imagine that we're in a situation now where the document that gave birth to our nation would be seen as controversial, would be seen as something worthy of censorship. But this is what the men who put their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line so that we could be free. These are the things that they said. And I think they gave some other very wise insight in these documents. Actually, in the Declaration of Independence, they said, with firm reliance on divine providence. So we should not be trusting in our arms. We should not be trusting in our money or in our genius, our ability to outsmart these people. Really, our trust needs to be in one place, that is in divine providence. For those who aren't familiar with that term, that is, God's goodness, God's directing of the affairs of mankind. That's where our trust needs to be. And there was a flag that flew during that era, during the War for Independence, called Appeal to Heaven. And they said, we appeal to the king, we appeal to the parliament, we appeal to these governors, and they just mock us and they spit on us, and they put us on boats and take us overseas for putting us on trial for pretended offenses without even giving us the benefit of a jury. This is absolutely intolerable. We're not going to accept this. We're done appealing to you guys. We're going to go to a higher court. We're appealing to heaven. And folks, we're in the right here. God gave us the right to live. God gave us the right to our property. God gave us the right to pursue happiness and to make a living. And if the government stops protecting those rights and starts destroying those rights, we have a real problem. And folks, that's where we are now. So we have got to take this serious.
I know we're up against the clock, but before we leave, two things. One, about our children. You talked to us last time about, it's flared up in the last couple of weeks here with parents standing up and against boards of education where they feel like they're doing wrong by their children. Your advice to people on being aware of their rights and their responsibilities as parents and the freedoms that we really must insist on there.
Yeah, and the way things have progressed is just shocking, Dunnigan. I mean, we had the Secretary of Miseducation, Miguel Cardona, in Congress, and they asked him, so, do you think parents should be the primary stakeholders in the education of our children? And, personally, that's grotesque. I'm not a stakeholder of any kind, primary or otherwise. That's my child. God entrusted that child to me, right? There's no business about stakeholders here. You're not a stakeholder in the education of my child, period. And yet he couldn't even bring himself to say that parents are the primary stakeholders. So, well, I think parents are important stakeholders. This is the level that we have descended to, where parents who are upset about their children being sexualized, being indoctrinated, being taught that they might have been born in the wrong body, being taught that America is evil, where parents who are upset about these things, quite rightly, are being now painted as domestic terrorists. So parents, I've been telling you guys this for 6-7 years. You can scream at the school board all you want. You could take over all the school boards you want. You cannot reform a system that was designed to do what it's doing. And I think that's becoming more clear to a lot of people now. Look, we tried to reform. We tried to get involved. We tried to go speak out and make our voices heard. And they did the same thing that the king and the parliament did to our forefathers. They spit on us. They sicked the government on us. They sent the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security after us. The Attorney General of the United States acted like we're all a bunch of criminals. Guys, if it wasn't clear, 2 months ago, it should be clear now. These people hate you. They want you out of the way. They want to be able to brainwash your children. They want to be able to weaponize your children against you and against this country and against our freedoms without any interference from pesky parents. So, folks, there's only one option left. And, I don't want to discourage people from speaking out at school boards. I think that's great. If you want to run for school board, that's great. But again, if the building's on fire and your child's inside, stop thinking about the school board. Stop thinking about petitions and lobbying your legislatures. Your child is inside and he's burning, right? You got to run in that building. You got to grab that child. You've got to run out the door. That is truly the only solution. I'm tremendously encouraged, Dunnigan, that millions of families just in the last couple of years have recognized this. The momentum is now firmly with us. We've had major conservative figures. Candace Owens just last week went on Fox News and said, parents, you got to get your kids out. Dennis Prager of Prager U said, parents, the best thing you can do for your country is to get your kids out. Franklin Graham, Rush Limbaugh. I mean, all these superstars, conservatives, Christians, whatever, have been saying, parents, you've got to get your kids out. So we've got the momentum. And, if this didn't convince you folks that you needed to get your kids out, I don't know what will.
Upcoming is the Red Pill Expo. We're a very short time frame. How can people find out more about that? How can they get plugged in?
Well, thank you so much. So, yeah, I'm one of the directors of the Red Pill Expo. We would absolutely love to see you guys there. It's going to be in Lafayette, Louisiana, November 6th and 7th. If you use my link, it's redpillexpo.org/Newman/REF/222. You can find that on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, whatever. You can even get a little bit of a discount there. And so go to redpillexpo.org/REF/222. And you can, if you can't make it in person, I know a lot of people don't want to fly right now. They're not willing to put the thing on their face or whatever. You can always get the live stream. It's going to be phenomenal. A lot of information about health, about the assault on our liberties, about the encroaching totalitarianism. And hopefully I'll meet people there. And if not, hopefully I'll meet you next time. So thank you very much, Dunnigan.
We've been speaking with Alex Newman. He is with the Liberty Sentinel and also many other publications, and a widely spoken author about liberty and freedom. Alex, as always, thanks on behalf of all of our viewers for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dunnigan.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. 31 years strong, A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, 0 complaints, licensed and bonded for physical delivery, vault storage, or precious metals IRAs. Excellent prices, privacy, and confidentiality. Pay by check, money order, ACH, bank wire, or Bitcoin. Satisfaction guaranteed. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs.